Back at SummerSlam 2019, one of the most surprising admissions was that Roman Reigns wasn't on the card. A staple of WWE programming for years now, he's in that position because Vince McMahon looked at him and said, "That's my guy." It's not been the first time. McMahon has long been said to have a certain type of look he goes for, and that is of course big dudes. I'm not totally against it because there is something cool about seeing a gargantuan human bombing towards the ring, and let's be fair, over the last decade or so the WWE roster has been far more diverse than ever. Being 6'2" and 225 pounds is no longer the minimum. Still true though, hence this list. I'm Simon from What Culture, remember to subscribe. This is 10 wrestlers Vince McMahon loved at first sight. Number 10, Hulk Hogan. Vince McMahon was so enamored with everything that Hulk Hogan brought to the table that it shaped what pro wrestling was in the 1980s. He was the blueprint and the biggest success story for what sports entertainment was, and as soon as he had been shifted over from the AWA, there was no looking back. Amazingly, Hogan was meant to be in the WWF far sooner than he was. Planned to arrive as a heel under Vince McMahon Sr., it all went bad when Hulk accepted a role on Rocky III. Back then, that was not a move a traditionalist approved of, so when the Hulkster was done, he went to the American Wrestling Association instead. Vince Jr. saw the money, however, and that Hogan's larger-than-life nature was perfect for where he wanted to take the industry. He was the antithesis to Bob Backlund, who had been leading the charge, and as he rightfully saw, it transformed everything. So much so it became the template time and time again. McMahon never forgot his first, for better or worse. Number 9, Tom McGee. In 1986, Vince McMahon was ready to move on from Hulk Hogan, as dumb as that sounds now. He saw Tom McGee, who was even more chiseled than his current leading man, and after that match with Bret Hart, he thought Tom had everything. McMahon wanted to strike before it was too late, and McGee was now the chosen one. Unfortunately, as it turned out, the reason he had shone in that fight was because of the Hitman. Everything else Tom didn't go very well, and it soon became clear that if Vince wanted this to be his top guy, that massive changes were going to take place. They did not. A failed experiment, but one that was still born out of the fact that as soon as the boss had seen McGee, he couldn't help himself. He could do a backflip, for goodness sake. Hogan couldn't do that. What he could do, though, was sell out buildings. Never forget that's all wrestling is. Number 8, Diesel. During the 1994 Royal Rumble, when Kevin Nash tore through fools who got in his way, Vince McMahon was on commentary. That meant he had a front row seat to see this domination, feel the fire, and hear the crowd who went nuts for his Big Daddy call. At this moment, the love was born. It was so strong that nothing else that happened in that Rumble mattered. Despite Bret Hart also receiving deafening cheers and Shawn Michaels proving his moxie with an Iron Man-like performance, all Vince saw was the 7-footer and how he could make this beast his champion and likely build the company around him. That is exactly what happened, and really it was because of how Diesel looked and how other people didn't look. Much like McGee, it didn't work, although one Kevin Nash would still go on to have a pretty notable career. Bet your ass he'll be the first person to tell you that. Number 7, Apollo Crews. Yes, McMahon likes big guys, we've established that, and that's fine, so do I. Seeing Triple H as a kid is the reason I started lifting weights. It can be very inspiring. Alas, what happens sometimes is that Vince sees rippling muscles and moves wrestlers to the main roster before they're ready, and that doesn't help anyone. Apollo Crews was one of these people. Instead of hanging around in NXT and working on the skills that needed a bit of sprucing, he was there for barely a second before he arrived on the Raw after WrestleMania. The experience he would have received working in Florida and takeover shows would have helped no end as he adjusted to the WWE way, meaning when he was called up, Crews would have been better prepared. And don't forget that used to be the idea of the third brand. Not now because on USA Network, but whatever, it's why people used to go there. Sadly, his look deprived us of this, and Apollo now is lost in the shuffle, and that is ridiculous. Earlier on this list, McMahon wanted a gym dude who could do flips, and he's right there and he's pretty good, but instead we ignore him like he's nothing. Oh well. Number 6, the Boogeyman. The Boogeyman was weird, right? An 80s gimmick that somehow found itself alive in the very serious early 2000s, Vince McMahon was super high on Marty Wright even after all the shenanigans down in OVW. If you don't know, the character was so stupid it made Santino Marella crack up on air, which got him a literal clapping around the ear from Jim Cornette. As we know, you don't break kayfabe around Jim. It didn't affect anything, and instead the Boogeyman had a very prominent position on the roster, including being booked into a segment with Donald Trump. Well, a scene that would be today. The guy keeps coming back as well, be it appearances in the Royal Rumble or for reunion shows. I bet he's more than happy with his Legends deal. As long as he's cool with eating some kind of worms when the cameras are rolling, he will always have a place. That's kind of nice, really. It's not the worst thing in the world to be on the right side of the chairman. Number 5, Lars Sullivan. In a similar vein to Apollo Crews, you'd have to imagine that as soon as McMahon saw a picture of Lars Sullivan, he'd booked him through to 2023. An old school monster if there ever was one. If he had been around in the late 80s, he would have been in a Mania main event against Hogan within seconds. Sullivan was like a better version of King Kong Bundy. This is why when Nikki Cross, EC3, Heavy Machinery, Lacey Evans and Lars were being heavily promoted for the main roster, we all knew it would be he in the best position because of how Vince McMahon sees things. He would come in, destroy some fools and go from there. That is basically what he did until it all hit a brick wall, but let's not pretend that wasn't the direction we were going in. The love is likely so strong that when he is back from injury, not even the controversy surrounding him will deter his push. Sullivan will be back to eating fools before you know it. And if not, I will chow down on my hat instead. Number 4, The Big Show. The WCW version of Paul White did not impress Vincent Kennedy McMahon. After numerous big men had failed to set the WWE on fire, Vinny had decided the world had changed. Not only that, but World Championship Wrestling clearly had no idea how to book this giant, whereas if he was part of his company, he would transform him into a star the likes of never before. Instead, he was just going to ignore it for a bit. Eventually, he got his wish in 1999 when he tempted the now Big Show across, but even then it wasn't a smash hit out the blocks. There was problems with Show's weight and attitude, and he was soon stuck with The Undertaker, who was tasked with teaching his now protege the basics. It kind of worked, but even then it would be years of stop-start pushes before Show was considered a star in the way McMahon wanted. But again, there's the magic of being massive. Vince will stick with you until he can't stick with you anymore, giving you ample opportunity to rise above the parapet. Not sure many others would get such leeway, but such is the madness of the wrestling business. Being big is basically a safety blanket. Number 3, Johnny B. Bad. When the future Mark Merrow came to the WWE in 1996, he pissed a lot of people off instantly, or more specifically his contract did. Vince McMahon was so impressed with his Johnny B. Bad gimmick that not only harked back to the profitable 80s, but had also gotten over that he offered Merrow a guaranteed contract when such things weren't the norm. That annoyed the rest of the roster, who were making much less than this new guy, and we all know how that goes. War is on the cards. Crazy how it turns out though, right? Within a year, McMahon had lost interest in Mark, mostly because he had met his wife Rena Merrow and now saw nothing but success there. She soon became Sable and had a far better run of it than her husband in the WWE, but hey, at least they both made a lot of money. I'm going to stop talking about this now because Sable is married to Brock Lesnar these days, and I don't want to piss him off. Number 2, Dr. Jerry Graham. Jerry Graham was so good at being a heel that he turned Madison Square Garden into a mosh pit of hate. Fans couldn't stand the man as he hammed it up in the ring, right down to causing the odd riot because they wanted to rip his head off. As a youngster, Vince McMahon watched this from afar, and Jerry soon became his favorite wrestler. A man that he wanted to become when he grew up, this all irked his father, Vince Sr., so much so, he stopped his son from being an active performer and found him other roles in the business. As it turned out, this would lead McMahon Jr. to taking over the whole operation, which just goes to show you never really know the knock-on effect of your choices. Graham passed away in 1997 and was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2017. Go check him out on the network if you haven't done so already. His shtick is pretty good. Number 1, Gary Strydom. Who the flub is Gary Strydom, I hear you ask? Well, no, he's not a wrestler, so I've lied to you a bit, but he was Vince McMahon's chosen one when he launched the WBF, his ill-fated bodybuilding federation. Another way in the 80s where Vince thought he could glamorize muscles even more than he had done in wrestling, he set up the World Bodybuilding Federation and hoped it could replicate similar success. The man who would hold this all together was Gary Strydom, the new Hulk Hogan. And don't get me wrong, he looked the part and was beyond jacked, but that wasn't enough to save this bizarre venture, which in many ways was ahead of its time. Still though, it bombed, and if you want to see more, give it a quick YouTube search. It really is quite something. This also means that if McMahon makes the XFL a success in 2020, he may then turn his attentions back to the judging of biceps, which could see the return of Ico Pro to boot. I'm not gonna lie, I've wanted to try that stuff for years, even if Bret Hart once compared it to eating feet. Well, no, he didn't say that, he just said it was horrible, but still, Mr. McMahon, I would appreciate at least getting a sample pack of your nutrition supplements that I bet you have in a warehouse somewhere. It's probably next to a photo of Gary Strydom. That's how much Vince believed in him, although now we can look back and say, what the flub were you thinking? Know of any other wrestlers that Vince McMahon fell in love with at first sight? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then head over to whatculture.com and read yourself some articles, and follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. My name is Simon from What Culture, and I will talk to you again soon.